This is Promethean Actions Weekly class for June 28, 2025. This is Tony Pappert speaking to you from Michigan. I'll be your host. The speaker is Will Wirtz from Virginia, who has been fighting for many years in the forefront of a concept that Lyndon LaRouche created around the turn of this century, a four-power alliance for a new world monetary system, an updated and corrected version of the Bretton Woods monetary system, which Franklin Roosevelt fought for at the end of World War II. And current developments, which you're all aware of, between Washington, Moscow, Tel Aviv, Iran, China, put this concept of LaRouche's on the agenda, as Will describe. So I think I'll just pass it to Will.
And thank you, Tony.
You bet.
As you all know, we're just a few days away from the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence from Great Britain. And it's, I think, very appropriate that we think in terms of extending the principles of the American Revolution throughout the world. And President Donald Trump has taken a number of initiatives in the first 6 months of his presidency, which really create the opportunity to do that, not only to return to the principles of the American Revolution in the United States itself, but also to make the benefits of that system available to other nations throughout the world. And I wrote a book, 2023, called Beware the British East India Company. Could you put that up on the screen, Tony?
You bet.
Towards an alliance between the USA, Russia, China, and India to finally defeat the British Empire. And this book goes through the fact that the United States, Russia, China, and India throughout history have been allied directly or de facto against the British Empire and its East India Company, which conquered India, which waged 2 opium wars against China, which has always been oriented towards isolating and destroying Russia, and has waged numerous wars against the United States, including the attempt to suppress our revolution, the War of 1812. The picture on the cover of the book is a picture of the British burning down the White House in the War of 1812. It includes also a picture of the assassination of Tsar Paul I of Russia by a palace guard that was working directly with the British. And the reason that assassination took place is that Paul I had actually given orders to the Russian army to deploy to India to liberate India from the British East India Company and return its national sovereignty to India. And of course, the other 2 pictures include the famines and genocide which the British East India Company brought to India, and a picture of one of the battles during the 2 opium wars, which the British East India Company and the British Empire waged against China. So the fact of the matter is, Russia has been one of our greatest allies over history. During the American Revolution, the Russians refused the British demand that Russia send 20,000 troops to the U.S. to put down the American Revolution. And instead, what they did is they created the League of Armed Neutrality in support of America. Similarly, during the Civil War, where the British and the French supported the Confederacy, Russia deployed its fleet to San Francisco and New York City to prevent a British intervention against the Union. And of course, during World War II, we were allied with Russia, which bore the brunt of the Nazi war effort, losing 27 million people. We also allied with China in World War II against the Japanese militarists, and Roosevelt intervened to try to get Truman to agree to allow Indians to join the war effort against the Japanese and the Nazis. But instead, he jailed the Indian leadership for their demand that India be allowed to experience the self-determination, which was a principle of the Atlantic Charter, which Churchill had signed along with at the initiative of Roosevelt. Now, the fact of the matter is that today the enemy of the United States is not Russia's, not China's. It is, in fact, the Anglo-Dutch imperial system. And let me have the second picture, Tony.
You bet.
Now, besides the Anglo-Dutch system per se, what you have is something called historically the Entente Cordiale. This was an alliance between Britain and France in 1904. It followed the British defeat of the French in Africa at the Battle of Fashoda in 1898. And from that point on, France has always been the junior partner of the British. And with the Entente Cordiale was actually set up by King Charles's great grandfather, was King Edward VII. And in 2024, just last year, the British and the French celebrated the 120th anniversary of the Entente Cordiale. And this is what King Charles III said at that occasion. He said, "The connections between our people are myriad and represent the lifeblood of our Entente Cordiale, which was inspired by my great-great-grandfather, King Edward VII. As we look ahead to the 120th anniversary of the Entente Cordiale in 2024, it is incumbent upon us all to reinvigorate our friendship to ensure it is fit for the challenges of the 21st century." So what we're seeing, particularly in the case of Ukraine, is this Entente Cordiale. Remember, when Zelensky was forced to leave the Oval Office after making a fool of himself and disrespecting not only the president, but also the American people, he ran immediately to King Charles III. And the biggest backers of Zelensky have been the British and the French. The British have been the main instigators of the war in Ukraine. It was Boris Johnson who went to Kiev in 2022 and told Zelensky that the Ukrainians shouldn't sign a peace deal with Russia, but should continue fighting. And the British have continued, along with Macron, basically providing support for Zelensky in this war. Now, let me have the next picture, please. All right, here what you have is King Charles III of England and King Willem Alexander of the Netherlands. And these two figures really represent the obstacle to world peace. The recent NATO meeting in The Hague included a meeting where King Willem Alexander of Netherlands hosted all of the leaders of NATO, with Zelensky present with other guests, including from the Indo-Pacific region. And he gave a speech there. The point of his speech was to support the continued expansion of NATO. And of course, this has been one of the causes of the war in Ukraine, the continued expansion eastward of NATO towards the borders of Russia, something which the Russians had been promised would not occur. So I'll just read a couple segments from his speech. He says, at the start, our alliance had 12 countries. Then we grew. Today, we are an alliance of 32, with Finland and Sweden being our newest member. In the future, NATO will remain open to new members that share our values. We can't stand still. He also points to the threat posed by Russia and other hostile countries. And he welcomes our friends and partners in the Indo-Pacific region who into our circle as guests, as well as welcoming Zelensky and promising continued support for Zelensky's continued war effort, as opposed to going with President Trump's proposal to end this war and to save human lives. Now, can you give me the next picture, please? This is a picture of Prince Philip of England. He was the consort of Queen Elizabeth, and the person next to him is Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. These two individuals are the ones who created and operated the World Wildlife Fund, which has been in the forefront of pushing the false ideology of climate change, and also the very notion that we need to reduce the world's population, that we have finite resources, and that there are limits to growth. They are the advocates of a policy of entropy. They're advocates of the notion that we're a post-industrial society. And it should be noted that after he passed away, the membership card of Prince Bernhard in the Nazi Party came to light. It was discovered by an archivist, and the royal Dutch family had to admit that this was in fact true. From 1933 to 36, Prince Bernhard was a member of the Nazi Party, which he signed up for in Berlin. So this is the core of the enemy that we're dealing with today. And this Anglo-Dutch imperial system, which we still have today, which still runs the world today, and is the obstacle to the American system becoming dominant throughout the world. This emerged from the creation of the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company in the early 1600s. And that Anglo-Dutch system was a continuation of an earlier system, imperial system called the Venetian system, and which moved to the Netherlands first, and then to Britain, where there was actually a Venetian party, political party. Now, this system is what we're fighting against. I want to read something to you from Franklin Roosevelt. In 1943, at the Casablanca conference in Morocco, FDR told his son Elliot the following: "I'm talking about another war, Elliot. I'm talking about what will happen to our world if after this war we allow millions of people to slide back into the same semi-slavery. Don't think for a moment, Elliot, that Americans would be dying in the Pacific tonight if it hadn't been for the short-sighted greed of the French and the British and the Dutch. Shall we allow them to do it all over again? When we've won the war, I will work with all my might and main to see to it that the United States is not wheedled into the position of accepting any plan that will further France's imperialistic ambitions or what will aid or abet the British Empire in its imperial ambition. Okay, you can take that down, Tony. So this is not generally known, certainly not taught in the schools. But the main conflict in the world today is not between the United States and Russia or the United States and China. The main conflict in the world today, as it has been since before the American Revolution, is between the the Anglo-Dutch imperial system, which emerged from the British and Dutch East India companies, and on the other hand, the American system, which emerged with the American Revolution. This is the conflict in the world, and the issue is whether the American system can become the dominant system in the world, replacing once and for all the Anglo-Dutch imperial system. The importance of this is that it's very clear that President Trump is moving to establish peace throughout the world. At the end of the 12th-day war between Israel and Iran, President Trump was successful in establishing a ceasefire between Iran and Israel. And this could be the first, to the extent to which this holds, this could be the first step towards a broader peace arrangement in the Middle East as a whole for the first time, and really going back maybe 80 years. The Abraham agreements, which President Trump established in his first term, where a number of Muslim nations recognized Israel and vice versa, could be extended to include additional nations in the immediate period ahead. There's also a discussion of bringing an end to the war in Gaza, and also creating the conditions under which there can be some sort of resolution of the Palestinian question. That is all something which is potential at this point. It was also announced just yesterday that President Trump's team has succeeded in bringing a peace between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And as you know, President Trump has been fighting tooth and nail to bring an end to the Ukraine-Russian conflict against the opposition of the British, the Dutch, and the French. Now, excuse me. If you look at it, there have been any number of other very significant developments in the recent period, which lead to the possibility of major breakthroughs throughout the world. You have, after the truce was established, or the ceasefire between Iran and Israel, President Putin gave a statement where he said that he had great respect for President Trump, that he appreciated what President Trump is doing in the Middle East. Let me just read the full quote. "I hold President Trump of the United States in high regard. He has traveled a very hard and unsafe path to return to power and to the White House. He has survived more than one assassination attempt on his life. He is a courageous man. I believe that President Trump is sincerely seeking a solution on the Ukrainian track. In general, thanks to President Trump, relations between Russia and the U.S. have improved, and the first steps have been taken. A meeting with President Trump is possible, and we would be happy to prepare for it." Now, You also had the signing of the framework agreement between China and U.S. on trade. You also had a ceasefire established between India and Pakistan after the terrorist attack in Kashmir. And President Trump played a role in this, in that he threatened to cancel all trade deals with both Pakistan and India unless a ceasefire was established. And if you look at the most recent G7 meeting in Canada, Trump left before meeting with Zelensky, so he continues to put pressure on Zelensky. And he made it very clear that it was a mistake of the G8 in 2014, when Obama was president, to have kicked Russia out of the G8, so that you now have a G7 where Russia is not a part. So he is really launching major initiatives throughout the globe, even as he is taking action here in the United States itself to bring about the conditions for the United States becoming a superpower in manufacturing once again, and increasing the standard of living of the population in the United States by increasing the productive powers of the U.S. labor force. Now, so all of that is going on, and of course, I want to add one other thing in terms of the Anglo-Dutch and the French, and that is in respect to Canada. As you know, as soon as Mark Carney came into office as Prime Minister of Canada, he invited King Charles III to come and speak before the Parliament. King Charles III is the monarch of Canada. Canada was ceded to the British Empire in 1763 at the at the Treaty of Paris, and has remained a British colony ever since. Mark Carney is the only non-British citizen who has ever been head of the Bank of England from 2013 to 2020. And to top it all off, in terms of the way in which Carney and his family are operatives of King Charles III, you should know that Sean Carney, the brother of Mark Carney, is the chief operating officer at Kensington Palace, which is where Prince William and Catherine live, and that's where they operate out of. So the Carney family works directly for King Charles III, and that's what we're up against in terms of Canada. And that should be known, that it's a hostile country. It's not our best friend. And as you know, Canada just imposed taxes on U.S. digital services. So President Trump stopped trade negotiations with them. But also, it should be noted that the EU was directly created by the Entente Cordiale. It was created by Margaret Thatcher and Francois Mitterrand, who forces in London considered to be their boy. And they pushed this through as a precondition for German reunification after the fall of the Soviet Union. So what you're dealing with here is an European Union, which is controlled by the Anglo-Dutch, operating through their junior partner, the French. And they are the main obstacle to bringing about a settlement in Ukraine. They are also the force that's destroyed the sovereignty of all of Europe. They say 32 nations are now members of NATO, and of course, most of them are members of the EU, and they're run by an unelected bureaucracy. They gave up their sovereignty. and they're controlled, as I indicated, by the British and the Dutch. And the only way that we're going to solve the crises within the world as a whole is the extent to which we uh, defeat the Anglo-Dutch imperial forces. And the only way that can be done is by creating a new Bretton Woods system through the initiative of the United States. That means that President Donald Trump would have to take the initiative on this score. And it would have to be done in cooperation with Russia, China, and India. Just those four countries would have to initiate it. The Bretton Woods system would be open to all sovereign nations once it's actually created. But those four nations, which have different systems and are divided among them, divided in many respects. China and India, for instance, have historical divisions. And of course, the United States has, since FDR's death, has been in opposition to Russia for much of the last approximately 75, 80 years. Now, so that's what's got to actually occur right now. The revolution in world affairs that has to occur is to bring about a new Bretton Woods system, replacing the existing system, which is dominated by the Anglo-Dutch imperial forces. It's a monetarist system. It's not what Roosevelt initially intended. Once he died, Churchill and Truman moved to dilute the Bretton Woods system, and by the 1960s, it was in a full crisis. In 1971, Nixon abandoned Bretton Woods, introduced globalization, floating exchange rates instead of fixed exchange rates. He abandoned pegging the dollar to the gold reserve system, and that was then followed by Jimmy Carter and the Trilateral Commission, presidency of Zbigniew Brzezinski and Paul Volcker as the Federal Reserve. And they introduced free trade, globalization, and hollowed out U.S. manufacturing, outsourcing to China, Mexico, Southeast Asia, and so forth, in order to exploit cheap labor. Now, President Trump has begun to reverse that through his tariff policy. And it should be noted that the tariff policy is completely an American system policy. This is what was advocated by Alexander Hamilton. It was advocated by Friedrich List, Henry C. Carey, all the way through McKinley. And that is designed to protect the manufacturing of our nation and the productive powers of the American workforce. So the system that we have now is directly in opposition to the American system of economy. And you may recall that when he was running for president in the first term, President Trump gave a number of speeches in which he called for the American model of political economy, citing Alexander Hamilton and other Lincoln, McKinley, and other leaders of the American system of political economy. That is what he's trying to bring to the United States. That is what we can also bring, and he's trying to bring to the rest of the world. And now, I think what needs to be stressed here is that some of the features of what the Anglo-American system, Anglo-Dutch imperial system is in terms of economy. Can I have the next picture, Tony?
Yeah.
Okay, this is Thomas Malthus. Thomas Malthus was the first a professor of political economy at the British East India Company College in England in the early 1800s. And his theory was that population grew more rapidly than agricultural production. Therefore, we could not sustain a growing population because of finite resources. This Malthusian policy continues to this day. That's what's really behind the ideology of limits to growth, the idea that we have finite resources and therefore we have to save those resources, and we can't have more population because they'll consume those resources, and so forth. That's the Malthusian policy. As I said, this continues to exist today. It's really the ideology behind climate change. The idea of human-induced climate change. Climates change, but the issue is what's the cause? The cause is actually solar, galactic, cosmic forces. I mean, one interesting thing would be what it's the effect of what's going on with the shift in the North Pole towards Siberia. There's why don't we look at those kinds of phenomena, as opposed to the idea that it's human industry which creates climate change. And the fact of the matter is that the Earth has been this has been proven by ice core samples taken in Greenland, that the Earth has been hotter for the last 10,000 years than it has been since industry was introduced in the 1800s. So the Earth is actually cooler right now than it has been for most of the last 10,000 years. But this is completely ignored. Now, that's the policy of Malthus. It leads to a policy of population reduction, of suppression of industry, and for instance, the demographic challenge disasters that we have all over the world with the low birth fertility rate in most countries. Now, kind of the next picture. This is Adam Smith. There are those who say that Adam Smith is the founder of the American system of economy, but that's just a complete lie. The founder of American system of political economy was Alexander Hamilton, whose works were organized against Adam Smith. Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations was written in behalf of a policy of free trade. It denies the very existence of nations. It's based upon a notion of a unipolar world run by the British, where the British can produce goods and then dump them on subject nations who are told that they must remain exporters of raw materials and not develop their own manufacturing. That's what the Wealth of Nations is all about. And that's what Adam Smith is about. Now, let's look at the American system of political economy. Next photo, please. All right, this is Alexander Hamilton. Now, Alexander Hamilton created the American economy. Under the British, as I indicated, we could not manufacture anything. It was outlawed. The British view was to use the American colonies as exporters of raw materials to Britain. And ultimately, they wanted the U.S. colonies to help bail out the British East India Company, which had suffered financial hardship before the American Revolution, because its tax collecting policies in India and its policy of growing opium instead of food had led to famine and genocide in India. And I think it was in the early 1770s, there was a banking crisis in England, many banks going under, and the the British East India Company was regarded by King George as too big to fail, so they bailed it out. And what they tried to do was to get the Americans colonists to pay for the bailout of the British East India Company. Now, Alexander Hamilton introduced not only protection, that is protective tariffs, but he also created the first national bank of the United States of America. We didn't have a central bank. We had a national bank, and that bank extended low interest credit for manufacturing and for infrastructure development. That's something that the U.S. Federal Reserve doesn't do, because the U.S. Federal Reserve is a central bank based upon the Bank of Amsterdam, which was created virtually at the same time as the Dutch East India Company, and the Bank of England, which was created in 1690 approximately, after William of Orange from the Netherlands had taken over the British Crown in 1688. So that national banking is the American system, and that's something that we need in the United States today. I think generally it's understood that Hamilton promoted tariffs, but what's still lacking is a sovereign national banking mechanism. Lincoln accomplished this through his greenback policy. Franklin Roosevelt accomplished it through the Finance Reconstruction Corporation. And we don't actually have that right now, and it's something that we very urgently require. But this is what Alexander Hamilton stood for. The United States was in massive debt. People are concerned about debt. Well, the U.S., having fought the Revolutionary War, was in massive debt. And Hamilton retired it. How? Through growing the economy, through tariffs, and through national banking. And that's the kind of thing that we have to do right now. Debt is not a problem per se if you actually have a growing economy. Contrary to libertarians in the House and the Senate who object to an expenditure which may increase debt in the short term. Now, next picture, please. This is Friedrich List. And Friedrich List wrote a book called National System of Political Economy. He was originally German. He became an American citizen. He lived in Reading, Pennsylvania. And he was very much in favor of the protective tariffs, and he criticized both Thomas Malthus and Adam Smith for their free trade policies and for Malthus's anti-human policies, of arguing that we cannot sustain human life. And his notion, which is critical, is that the source of, and this was also Hamilton, that he had a concept of productive power of labor, and List had a similar conception. And what he put forward was the notion that of mental capital, that what we need to invest in is mental capital to increase the productive, creative powers of the human mind, so as to develop the economy and thus to sustain a growing population and a higher standard of living and a greater with greater creative powers. And then the next picture, please. All right, this is Henry C. Carey. He was the advisor to Abraham Lincoln, and he wrote a book called Harmony of Interests, which, among other things, makes the clear distinction between the British system and the American system. And what he says is the American system protects its workers and its manufacturing capability through protected tariffs, whereas the British system advocates free trade. And he also said that the American system is for universal peace, and you see that in what President Trump is trying to carry out. And the British system is for universal, or you could also say perpetual warfare. And that's what we see with the British, the French, the Dutch, continuing to support this war in Ukraine, in opposition to President Trump's efforts to bring it to a peaceful end, so that we can actually concentrate on economic cooperation as the basis for peace throughout the world. Now, what I want to just stress is that with all of President Trump's, again, I mentioned this at the beginning, with all of, you could take the picture of Henry C. Carey down, please, Tony. With all of President Trump's efforts towards achieving peace and bringing about economic development, the issue here is how do we create durable peace, say 50 years into the future? How do we do that? And what the only way that can be done is if we actually eliminate, finally, the Anglo-Dutch imperial system. It's a monetarist system, a free trade, of zero growth, of central banks, as opposed to national banking. It's a system based upon entropy. It's a system which wants to suppress human creativity because it's a system that sees creativity as a threat to its continued existence. I would just like to point out two ironies. We've recently had no kings demonstrations around the country. Well, there is no king in the United States, but there is a king in Canada. There is a king in Australia. There is a king in New Zealand. There is a king in Great Britain. There is a king in the Netherlands. And these kings are actually a problem for the world. And the fraud of these demonstrations is that they accuse President Trump of being a king, and they give cover to the actual kings who were acting in the tradition of King George, against whom we fought a revolution. And these are the kings who are unelected. These are the kings who are destroying nations throughout the world and don't want to have sovereign nations. They want a unipolar world. So that's the first fraud. Secondly, you have Bernie Sanders and AOC running around the world running around the United States holding alleged anti-oligarchism rallies. They're the oligarchs. The policy of the oligarchy is, in fact, green ideology. The policy of the oligarchy is opposition to tariffs and support for free trade. They are the oligarchs. Bernie Sanders is the oligarch. AOC is the oligarch. They're carrying out the policy of the oligarchy, and they're providing cover for the actual kings like King Charles III and Willem Alexander of the Netherlands. So I think that should just be noted in terms of what we're dealing with here, because the actual fight, which goes back historically, it's reflected in the fight between the American Revolution and the British or Anglo-Dutch imperial system, but it goes back further in particularly Western civilization. It is a fight between republicanism on the one hand and oligarchism or empire on the other. And it is empire which is the source of war. So if you want to get rid of war in a durable manner, you've got to eliminate empire. You've got to have a world system which is based upon a community of principle among a family of sovereign nation states, as opposed to a unipolar world, or what Adam Smith calls a cosmopolitan system. And there are certain, throughout history, there are certain sort of reflections of this fight. You have the fight between Zeus, who was an oligarch, who wanted to suppress human creativity, and Prometheus, on the other hand, after which this political movement and website are named Prometheus. He gave man hope. He gave man creativity. He gave man fire and a method of thinking. the Promethean method. You had the fight between Lycurgus of Sparta and Solon of Athens. You have the fight between Plato on the one hand and Aristotle on the other. And the republicanism and the fight for republics or sovereign nation states is characterized by certain concepts, which are really absolutely critical. Particularly in the Christian period, it's the notion of man created in the living image of the Creator. That is, having the capacity for creative reason in the image of the Creator. Capax Dei, that is Latin for having the capacity a divine of God. I mean, in a certain sense, the idea that the man is in the image of the Creator, the living image of the Creator, and he has the capability of acting as a, in a certain sense, as an instrument of the Creator. There's the concept of the ontological concept of change, a principle of change. The universe is, as Heraclitus said, the only constant is change. If you stay still, if you stay in the same economy, it'll collapse. If you stay with the same set of ideas, though, it's not, you're not going to be able to progress. So the idea is that man is capable of love, or the Greek word agape, and creative reason. That's the nature of the human soul, agapic reason. And we are capable, through the exercise of that ability, to bring about unending scientific and technological progress. And we do that by hypothesizing ever higher hypotheses, which go beyond what we previously thought, developing new technologies, making new scientific discoveries, which redefine our resource base and allow man to make further progress. This idea is an anti-entropic idea. It is the idea that the universe does not wind down. The universe is capable of further development, and man, as a microcosm, has a responsibility of developing the macrocosm of the universe, basically to further develop the universe in harmony with God's will. Now, the British system and the oligarchical system historically is based upon zero growth. It's based upon free trade, central banking, population reduction, the assumption of entropy, that the universe is winding down, the denial of national sovereignty, the suppression of industry. And these are the policies of Malthus. These are the policies of Adam Smith, against which policies we are fighting. Now, what I want to do is just to conclude with the following. I hope I'm still on there, Tony, because
You're on.
I
You're
love
on.
my picture. Anyway, we, as Lyndon LaRouche pointed out, the problem is that since the Anglo-Dutch imperial system has been in place since the year 1763, when the British Empire was consolidated at the Treaty of Paris, following the 7 Years' War, most of the world is operating within a fishbowl. And it does, even world leaders, maybe less so than others, but many throughout the world don't understand the mental shackles which are restricting their thinking. Lyndon LaRouche referred to it as a shared disease, because we've been in this fishbowl of the Anglo-Dutch imperial system for all of these years. And I just want to give you a few examples of that. For instance, the issue of population reduction. This is a strictly Malthusian concept put forward basically the 20th century by such British ideologues as John Maynard Keynes, Bertrand Russell, H.G. Wells. The idea that we can't sustain a growing population. There's an individual by the name of Hans Joachim Schnellenberg, who received he became an honorary member of the Order of the British Empire. He was appointed, I think, by Queen Elizabeth. But this person, he's German in terms of citizenship, but he's a big climate change fanatic, and he says that the carrying capacity for human beings of the planet Earth is only 1 billion people. So what does that mean about the other 7 billion people? It means genocide. Now, with the exception, there are only a few exceptions. One of the biggest exceptions is President Trump. But most of the other nations of the world accepted the climate change treaty, which is based not on science, but on a false Malthusian notion. President Trump withdrew from the Paris Treaty during his first administration, and he's indicated in certain executive order that he will withdraw from it in this term of office as well. But Russia agrees with it. China, India, Brazil, South Africa, all of the BRICS nations agree with this. And I just give you some of the quotes. I'll just focus on this one in particular. But Yi Gang, who's the governor of the People's Bank of China from 2018 to 2023, expressed the Chinese policy. Carbon emitters need to pay carbon taxes. We have worked together to build a green belt and road. In 2019, under the guidance of the People's Bank of China, the Green Finance Committee of the China Society for Finance and Banking jointly launched the Green Investment Principles for the Belt and Road with the City of London to help the developing countries build up their green finance capacities and improve their resilience to climate change. You also pointed out, this is in 2023, that Shanghai has put forward the goal of building an international green finance hub. If you look at comments that have been made by various third world leaders, for instance, Nehru, India, far from needing a bigger population, would be better off with fewer people. And he cites H.G. Wells, who was very much for population control. Or you have Bertrand Russell. He wrote in The Problem of China. But in the long run, if the birth rate is as great as is usually supposed, no permanent cure for their poverty is possible, while their families continue to be so large. In China, Malthus's theory of population, according to many writers, finds full scope. And then he goes on to say, peace can never be secure until international socialism is established throughout the world. He wrote this in The Problem of China. So the point I'm making is, and here's another one. Did you realize that John Maynard Keynes, who was the follower of Malthus, he was chairman of the Malthusian League in Britain and vice president of the British Eugenics Society from 1937 to 44. And he was the founding vice president of the Society for Cultural Relations with the Soviet Union. And he traveled to Russia in 1925 and lectured the Politburo. There is no more important object of deliberate state policy than to secure a balanced budget of population. And of course, Prince Philip is notorious for having said that when he dies, he'd like to be reincarnated as a virus, so as to contribute to population reduction. But the point here is that many throughout the world have adopted this shared disease, which comes from the Anglo-Dutch imperial system and their ideologues. And for instance, if we were to create a four-power agreement based on fixed exchange rates, gold reserves system, and national banks which issue low interest credit for real production, if we're going to need to jettison the Paris Climate Change Treaty, all four powers are going to have to reject that, and we're going to have to also reject free trade of Adam Smith, and not try to use the World Trade Organization to your own advantage, citing Adam Smith, for instance, and free trade. So there are going to have to be certain changes in the way people think if we're going to actually bring about this four-power agreement for a new Bretton Woods system. But if you look at the history of humanity, the cause of war is this monetarist imperialist system. When Venice was in power, and Venice was just a city, but it controlled the banking system in Europe, and it on the basis of free trade. So with Venice in control, there was 100 years war between France and England. And during that period, you also had the spread of the plague, which reduced the population by nearly half. You also had you had wars ongoing between the Dutch and East India companies. The NATO's now talking about an Indo-Pacific mission. Well, what is that with the Dutch and British East India companies? They took over. They took over India. The Dutch waged wars against China, Vietnam, Cambodia. They took over Indonesia. That's the legacy of the East India companies. What NATO was talking about right now. So what you had is you had wars between global wars between the Dutch, the British, and also the French. The 7 Years' War was a world war. It was waged in India. It was waged in North America. It's what we call them the French and Indian Wars. You also had World War I. You have World War II, and now we have the potential for World War III unless we're successful, unless President Trump in particular is successful in bringing about such an alliance as the four-power agreement. So, we're at a punctum saliens, as the dramatist Friedrich Schiller would say. We can go one of two ways. We can go in a tragic direction because we don't free ourselves from those mental shackles of the Anglo-Dutch imperial system, or if we do free ourselves from those shackles, and we plow ahead with a vision for a world based upon a community principle among sovereign nation states, committed to economic development, committed to not only developing this planet, but to extra terrestrial development. If we commit ourselves to higher energy flux density types of energy as opposed to solar power, if we commit ourselves to developing the relative potential population density of the planet Earth and colonizing space, then we're in a totally different geometry in which republicanism wins, and that must be our objective.
Terrific. Thank you so much.